Hey, what's going on, guys? Jason here. In this video, I will be talking about JavaScript hoisting. So I'll just be talking about the basics and show you a code example of what's going on. So JavaScript hoisting, all hoisting is basically whenever you declare any functions or variables inside your JavaScript program, um, that data, that information, those functions, those variables will get stored in memory inside your program. And so to better explain that, I can show you a diagram I created here. Oops, let me delete this. So right now, let's say I have this is my JavaScript program. So this is the global execution context. So this would be the global scope. And so right now, if you look here, I would have a variable in here, which is just called apple, which is a string of apple. And I also have a function. And so what happens is whenever so there's two phases that happen in the JavaScript program. The first one is the creation phase. And so in the creation phase, when your JavaScript program runs, it's actually creating memory to store all the variables and functions that are inside your program. So in terms of functions, it will actually create space here in memory, and it'll store the function and all of the contents inside that function. And it'll also store the variables, but it will not actually assign a value to the variable. Well, I guess it will, but it would actually give it a default value of undefined. So it'll store in memory, and it'll create space in memory, and it'll take whatever variables you have in there, and it'll store them in memory, and it'll give it a default value of undefined. And then after that, we go into the second phase, which will be the execution phase, and that's when we're actually executing the code inside your program. So that's when we go into here and we're actually assigning the variable here, apple, to this string, and function we're running, or we create this function which was already stored in memory, and then we'll go ahead and run that function. So if I have so let me open up the console here. So let's say I have a variable called apple equal to apple, and then I have a function, call it hello, and I will return hello. Oops. And so if I console.log apple and I run hello, so if I run this code, what you would expect to see is, probably you would expect to see the string apple, because we're console.logging the apple variable, and you would also expect to see the hello string. So if I run that, let's see. So yep. So like I said before, we got apple and we also got hello. And so let's say we wrote it this way now. Oops, sorry about that. So let's say, actually, let me do this. Oops. So Command X. Okay. So let's say I wrote it like this now. Let's say first I am console.logging apple, and then I am running the hello function before I actually created this variable and this function. So in most programming languages, you would probably get some type of error because you're trying to log out a variable or run a function that hasn't been created yet. But in JavaScript, the way things work is your program will actually hoist your variables and functions. So what that actually means is it'll run your program, and what it will first do is it'll create memory space for all of your functions and variables. And so it'll actually create some memory space for your variable apple and also your function hello. So if I run this, let's see, oh, actually let me open up a new tab here. Okay, so if I run this, you would notice what we get undefined. So for console.logging apple, we are getting undefined, and for the hello function, we are getting hello. And so like I said before in my diagram, I can show you here real quick. So the JavaScript program will actually first take your variable and functions, and it'll create memory. It'll create space in memory to store that variable and that function, and it'll first actually assign the variable apple a default value of undefined. And so the reason why we got undefined was because we were console.logging the variable apple when its value was undefined, because we hadn't gotten to this part, this line in the code where we're actually assigning the a string value to that variable. But with functions, it'll actually store the function and its contents in that function. So if you run the function before it's even, I guess, written, it'll actually still run the function as normal. It's just with variables, it'll by default give it a value of undefined, and then once the execution phase starts and it starts going through your code, and that's when we're assigning the values to the variables, and then that's when the variable actually gets its value of apple. But because we first console.logged apple before actually assigning the value here of the string apple, that's why we got undefined in our second example there. So hopefully that made sense. I felt like I was kind of talking a lot, but hopefully you guys learned something today. If you guys enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good day.